Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to Government House. This week marks the 2-year point in my tenure as your governor, and I thought it might be useful to take stock of the past 24 months and to look ahead at the coming year. You will have heard me say in many of my public speeches how impressed I have been with the extraordinary journey that the British Virgin Islands have taken over the past 40 years. From a quiet and peaceful part of the Caribbean region with little significant economic activity, a population of around 10,000, a political architecture based on the Executive Council model, the Virgin Islands within 2 generations have grown into a country which is a player on the global economy. Full-blown ministerial government, and a population which has increased nearly 4-fold. To have navigated these enormous social, economic, cultural and political changes with such a short space of time is a truly remarkable achievement. As I've said before, the Virgin Islands are the only overseas territory in the Caribbean region never to have required the United Kingdom government to recover the powers it had delegated to the local government. Such a pace of change inevitably creates tensions and challenges, and it is a testament to the people of the Virgin Islands that their character and their values that this process remains largely on track. That is not to say that there is nothing left to do. On the contrary, my visits to other overseas territories, such as Cayman last year and to Bermuda earlier this year, illustrate the need to continue the work to develop our basic infrastructure and public services, such as power, water, sewage, electricity, medical services, communications. In sum, all the basics of life that the public expect in a modern, developed society. And let us be in no doubt, that is what we are. I am regularly amused to hear complaints, particularly from expatriate visitors, about, for example, the immigration service, the time it takes to get a trade license or a work permit or planning permission, to which I generally reply, depending on the complainant, quote, "When was the last time you went through JFK, tried to set up a business in France? Or did you know that the Times of London this week reported that on average it takes 4 years from the application of planning permission to the time the builders can turn over the first sod of soil?" This is not meant to be an excuse for doing nothing. On the contrary, together with other developed nations, we need to continually strive to improve our services to the public. And I'm pleased to observe the commitment of our ministers to do so. A discussion of new measures that will allow us to streamline our bureaucracy and make it more businesslike is a regular topic at our weekly cabinet meetings, which, as you know, I chair. In my inaugural speech in August 2014, I set out my vision of the governor's role in a modern developed society that has chosen to remain an overseas territory. If you recall, I said, and I quote, "The role and task of the governor is to strike the balance between the views of Her Majesty's government in the United Kingdom, those of the government of the Virgin Islands, your elected representatives, and the aspirations of the people of the Virgin Islands. In carrying out this responsibility, I will seek to bring even-handedness, professional integrity, a willingness to listen to the views of others, coupled with a readiness to make the right decision, even if that is not always an easy or a popular one," end quote. It should be clear that I do not see the role of the governor as the eternal policeman, ready to intervene at every turn when people are dissatisfied with the answer they have received from the public service or their elected representatives. I believe firmly that the institutions of the territory and those elected to make decisions should shoulder their responsibilities. But I have to say that that commitment has often been tested over the past 2 years. Perhaps no more so than when the elected representatives of the opposition were unable to decide on their leader. I am pleased to note that the party has now decided to fulfill the commitments of their own constitution and hold an election of their leadership, as they are committed to do following every general election. In March last year, I announced my decision not to hold a commission of inquiry into the extension of the cruise pier. My public statement sets out the reasons for my decision. I will not go into the detail again here today, but suffice to say that this was a problem I inherited, and regrettably the reports by both the Auditor General and the Public Accounts Committee were deficient, requiring further investigation by the Caribbean Development Bank and an independent investigation funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Despite those 4 separate investigations, no evidence of wrongdoing was discovered. In the summer of last year, further allegations emerged about the Cruise Pier Village project. After lengthy discussions with the Premier and Cabinet Ministers, the Premier, as Minister of Finance, has engaged an independent and respected company to carry out an audit. The report should be available in the coming weeks, and it is my view that this is an example of the government taking its proper responsibility. Under the Virgin Islands Constitution, the Governor is directly responsible for the security of the territory and the RVIPF. This has been one of my major challenges over the past 2 years. On my arrival, you will recall, there was a serious case of corruption discovered. Such cases occur in police forces across the world. Neither the UK nor indeed our neighbouring islands have been immune from this type of activity. The details of the case are still sub judice. However, I am satisfied that the investigation has been thorough and that the incoming Director of Public Prosecutions will pursue this matter vigorously. It is much to the credit of the men and women of the RVIPF that they have continued to carry out their duties in a responsible and effective manner during this difficult period. Nonetheless, there are challenges ahead. As Governor, I was not satisfied that the leadership of the force was of a level and quality we required. I am therefore particularly pleased that we have secured the services of Commissioner Michael Matthews, a senior police officer with many years of experience, both in the United Kingdom and the Overseas Territory. In the short 4 months since his arrival on island, I believe he has already made a significant difference and will continue to do so. However, as is the case with the Governor, one person's individual efforts will be insufficient to deal with the complex modern-day challenges we face. I am particularly concerned that successive governments have reduced the funding for the RVIPF. There are many reasons for this, not least the absence of a clear, realistic, strategic direction from those in charge of the force. But successive governments and elected representatives have also failed to recognize that the first duty of any democratic government is the protection of their citizens. By contrast, during my 2 years, I have consistently been impressed by the support and serious engagement by my fellow members of the National Security Council, the Honourable Premier, Deputy Premier, and the Attorney General. Together with our new Commissioner, we have begun to turn around the situation, and I am confident that after 2 years' effort, we are now on the right track. Beyond the security agenda, the issue of the future regulation of financial services has also consumed much of my time and energy. As you'll be aware, the United Kingdom has been pressing the overseas territories and Crown dependencies to adopt new models of financial service regulation. This is a debate in which I first became involved while attached to the Overseas Territories Directorate in London before my arrival. As I explained in my inaugural address, quote, "The role of the Governor is to strike the balance between the views of Her Majesty's Government in the United Kingdom and those of the Government of the Virgin Islands," unquote. This has been no easy task, given the profound divergence of view on the importance the two governments attach to, on the one hand, the right to privacy, a human right enshrined in law, and on the other hand, the demands for greater transparency, which is a government policy. Some issues are better dealt with outside the glare of publicity, and while the revelations about the so-called Panama Papers a few months ago attracted much media attention, the often difficult negotiations between the two governments have in practice been going on for a period of nearly 3 years. As someone who has spent much of my previous career as a negotiator, I would like to pay tribute to the way the Premier, Dr. Smith, and his team, supported by the various responsible local institutions, notably the Financial Services Commission under the leadership of Dr. Robert Matavius, have responded to this challenge. Their measured yet steadfast stance, willingness to engage constructively, have led us to a place where by the end of this year, the Virgin Islands will be one of the best regulated jurisdictions in the world, a place where companies involved in developing the global economy can continue to manage the risks of foreign direct investment, where the individual's right to privacy is protected, but also a place where money laundering and criminal activity can be dealt with effectively. As you will know, the Governor has special responsibility for the public service. You'll also be aware that the process of public sector reform has been underway for several years. In March last year, when I addressed the senior leadership of the public service, I stressed that mission statements and vision are important, but the key to making any organization effective is to ensure that the key leadership positions are filled by experienced and capable people. It is their energy that will empower people to give of their best. It should therefore be no surprise that over the past 2 years there have been major changes in the top posts of the public service. This has been a deliberate policy. I have mentioned the Commissioner of Police, but altogether a total of 9 senior positions across the public service have already or will shortly change. Sometimes this has been because, after many years of dedicated service, it was the natural time for people to move on. In other instances, senior officials have decided to take time out to pursue further professional development. And I very much applaud that. But in other cases, I was not satisfied that the best interests of the territory were being served by those who remain in post. In this context, it is perhaps important to underline that the rules governing senior appointments are clearly set out in the Constitution. The Governor acts on the advice of the Public Service Commissions, the PSC, the JSLC, and the POSC, whose members are in almost all cases BV Islanders. Only one post, that of the Deputy Governor, is specifically assigned to a BV Islander. It follows from the vision that I have set out above, that the local community taking responsibility for its future, that I very much favour the appointment of local people to exercise that responsibility at the most senior levels. However, this needs to be balanced with a consideration of the needs of the territory as a modern developed economy and society. Bringing in expatriates to senior positions is not at all unusual. In the United Kingdom, a Canadian is currently Governor of the Bank of England. But where local talent exists, it should be developed and encouraged to serve the community. In the words of JFK, seek not to ask what my country can do for me, but what I can do for my country. However, in my experience, to achieve that situation that we would like to be in requires a very focused and structured approach. When I first worked on the South Atlantic Territory some 20 years ago, all senior positions were held by expatriates. When I returned as Governor of the Falklands 2 years ago, the majority of posts were held by islanders. This was a result of a focused effort to identify the future needs of the economy, to ensure that local people were encouraged to gain the appropriate qualifications, and long-term mentoring and succession planning. My experience of the past 2 years in the BVI shows me that our approach has not been sufficiently rigorous or structured. I have encouraged the Minister of Education and Culture and the new Deputy Governor to give this an even higher priority. I know that they themselves are keen to do so. However, I would equally urge members of the community to remember the words of JFK. Far too often we find that no BV Islander has applied for these senior posts when we know that local people with talent and the right qualifications exist. In recent weeks, I have seen, and you have seen, A number of senior politicians proposed the need for constitutional reform and perhaps independence. The response from the public to the latter question rather speaks for itself. The attachment of the people of this community to the United Kingdom was no better demonstrated than in the turnout for the celebrations of Her Majesty the Queen's 90th birthday. The message you sent in all the celebrations, ranging from the parade, the beacon lighting, the Salt Island reenactment, the stamps and license plates, will have been noticed beyond these shores. But within that wider context, constitutional reform to match our economic and social development is an essential part of building the house that is the British Virgin Islands. My period as governor has largely been one of consolidation, reinforcing the house's foundations and the lower levels of the building as we build ever higher. As I have commented publicly before, a modern democratic society needs to have in place the instruments and structures that provide democratic accountability, the checks and balances that allow citizens to call their elected representatives to account between elections. It is perhaps understandable, given the huge economic and social changes and the speed of that development over the past 40 years, that this aspect has not been at the front of our political agenda. Unfortunately, the result is that we lack many of these key instruments and structures. Without them, there is a real risk that the society relies too much on the integrity, wisdom, and determination of the two individuals in overall charge, namely the Premier and the Governor. Such a structure might have been suitable 40 years ago. The size of the population, the stage of economic and cultural development of the BVI today means that is no longer the case. Over recent months, I have been talking to the Premier and the United Kingdom government about the need to accelerate the implementation of these instruments and structures so that further political development can take place to reflect the economic and social development of this territory. Several of those measures I mentioned in the inauguration of the new NDP government in May last year, notably the need for greater open government, the Freedom of Information Act, the Data Protection Act, but there are others that will be crucial to establishing the checks and balances that our territory needs. Notably, a Whistleblower Act, a Human Rights Commission, and an Information Commissioner. Without these key pieces of legislation and institution, I doubt that the United Kingdom, nor indeed the wider population of these islands, would consider that the BVI is ready to take the next steps along the constitutional path. But they are all achievable. Indeed, some are already before the House of Assembly. So the choice of the speed with which you move down that path is in the hands of your elected representatives. In terms of transparency and open government, my own office have taken the initiative this year to produce a detailed report on all the activities carried out by my team. And when it comes out, that's what it looks like. You will be able to see it. It's a detailed, very detailed report of all the work that we do. This will be presented to the Assembly at its next session, along with all the other annual reports from the public sector. And this will be the first time that a report on the Governor's Office has ever been produced. The year ahead will be a continuation of the process of consolidation and strengthening of the public service that has been a key part of my tenure. But every year brings its own challenges, and I should perhaps single out two pressing issues. As you are all aware, there are difficult choices ahead for the government in deciding the priorities for the development of the infrastructure of the islands at a time when the global economy upon which we depend is still struggling. It follows that we must renew our efforts to ensure government finances are maintained on a sustainable long-term basis. Equally important to our economy is the future development of the legal sector, where I look to Madam Chief Justice Dame Janice Pereira as a BV Islander herself to support the government in putting in place quickly the measures proposed for the strengthening of the commercial court. Obviously, in the time available, it's only possible to give the headlines of the past 2 years and the year ahead, But I hope that it's been helpful, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Copies of this statement will be circulated, so you can have them, and they will be put out on the internet after this meeting. Thank you.